They write it out. I'll say exactly what I'm looking for. And it's going to be on the Industrial Revolution in Jackson next week. Yeah, but it's a test. You got to write it down. I'm looking for information. Yes. In fact, that's what it is. You think about if we do a 5-paragraph essay. It's a 5-paragraph essay is in essence an opening paragraph. I'll talk about what I'm looking for that one, and then 3 short IDs, and then a closing. That's an essay.
I got it.
I got it.
This will not hurt me.
Hey.
All right. So I got to get these in the grade book. Okay. So when are you leaving? You're not? All right, so a couple of things. So we'll do that test next week, and we're doing the reactions of the Industrial Revolution, and we have to have a test because the events leading up to the Civil War, that's just far too broad. So I gotta split these things up. We need to have a test. It will not come before the quarter grade. I'm sure some of you are happy, some of you are unhappy, but that's the way it goes. But I'll be honest with you, I don't care too much about quarters. I'm not saying you don't want the grade, but semesters what matter. There will be a chance for extra credit in December. That's dress up day.
How many characters in history?
And one we've already done.
What's terrifying thing?
Okay, so where did we finish in here yesterday? Did we get through?
We got
Oh, we're dependent on 1815. So let's go ahead and finish that up real quickly. So we got the laissez-faire economics. What is it called? Oh, this is today. What kind of economics is this? The root stuff. Conservative economics. And who came up with the American system of a bus, internal improvements, and tariff? Henry Clay. Yeah. What is it called when companies when companies are bigger, they have a competitive advantage because they should be more efficient? What is that called? The iron rule of economics. I mean, I will refer to this over and over again.
Oh,
yeah, someone said economies of scale or economics of scale. You hear it as economies, or sometimes just economy of scale. And also, what decides wages in the market? So if profits go up, what happens to wages? Has no effect. How about hard work?
Nothing.
No appreciable effect. And I really push this idea of, wait a second, yeah, how do you get people to work? Most people don't have a job. I mean, this is an issue that the country has to deal with. So we got through this, right? We got producers putting out systems production where? Who does the production? Yeah, the families in their homes. And we got right to here.
Yeah.
And it's not just dependent, consumers, not just dependent on now goods. Because all of us today, we cannot survive without other people making stuff for us. We are totally dependent upon others. I mean, that's why if power would go out, society would crumble within, I'd say, 4 days.
Are you serious?
I don't know if we'd last 3 days. If we didn't know why power went out, it just went out, it'd be chaos in 3 days. 2 days, you might be right. No, it'd be like warlords, axes through the street. That's me. That's what I would do. Follow me. So with that, but it's also, that means workers are dependent upon others for a job too. They're dependent on who has the capital now. And that is a big shift. You're dependent upon who has the capital. So make sure you write down that workers are too. Workers are too. They just can't sit and say, there's no jobs here. I'm going to go start making cars for a living. It doesn't work that way. The vast majority of jobs require somebody to have the capital. And so workers are very much more insecure under this system. Don't get me wrong. It was awful, tough, brutishly bad before. but at least there's a feeling of we're in control of our lives. Yeah.
Who's the president at this time?
Well, we're talking about this whole era. So it goes from Madison to Monroe to Adams to Jackson to Van Buren. Okay. All the way through Trump. Actually, all the way through Trump, because that's the system we have. There's a few presidents in between we'll get to.
A few.
Should we do the president's quiz now?
Yes.
No, I thought that was at the end of the year.
You ready?
And,
Actually, we will do that on the Friday before semester test. Actually, we're going to do it on the Monday. I think this year for finals we have Monday at school.
yes, that's right. Monroe.
We have kind of a,
Wait, so how does that work for the like the first semester final?
for my final.
Yeah, like for
It's all short
like,
ends.
so it's just like every other semester kind of going.
Culture and these
We're taking like a test in here.
Yeah, we'll take that.
We know kind of
So
what I think we're gonna have.
I'll give you.
We're just gonna take the AP test.
If you take AP, everyone has 2 finals. I get 2 finals. But the harder of the 2 finals, the longest one is waived if you take the AP exam.
This is irrelevant. Never mind. I'll ask at the end of class.
So the wage system instead of skill or how much you work. It's the wage system. Remember, this is supply and demand. This is a radically different thing. I should add though, the day before semester finals, you should write this down. That's when we do all the presidents from Washington to Teddy Roosevelt and their parties and their heights.
Why did you do their height?
The weights of the Secretary of State. That's all I want you to know. No, just the name of the president and their party. We'll do that right before the semester test. It'll be Washington and Teddy Roosevelt.
So is that where we'll stop?
We'll be about there. So with that, the wage system, it's no longer based upon skill necessary unless that skill is in demand, and it's no longer based upon how much you do. And even jobs that are piecemeal today, that are, you get paid for what, you get so many units paid, you get paid that amount, you get paid per unit, how much you produce, it's still that amount per unit is decided by the wage system. It's all decided by supply and demand. And that's why a minimum wage is such a big deal. Because if there's no minimum wage, wages will get pushed lower. So minimum wage kind of props it up a little bit, even though the minimum wage is really low now. So with that, the world is radically different. I mean, this is just such a topsy-turvy time where what everybody grew up with, adults by the 1830s, especially in the North, when they grew up with a certain world, by the time they're adults, everything was changing. And that is terrifying. If you don't know what tomorrow will bring, it is a scary time. This is showing the drunkard's progress, so this is an anti-drinking temperance. And it's supposed to show drinking and, look how happy they are and how much fun they're having. So going up to this spot of over drinking and then the decline down to ruin. And they don't mince words with this one. You see it? Yeah, shooting himself. But, and we'll talk about this again, this not only talks about the moral decline of what happens with drinking and carousing and suicide, but the big thing is also what happens to the family. If you're now reliant, the family's now reliant upon a wage for survival, and in this context, it was almost always the husband drinks the wage away, the family starves. So that's the issue with the family. And that's not even getting to all the moral and ethical problems with drinking, what that does to the family. So the first big reaction would be this changing family. The family would make huge changes. So we're talking about this is beginning the teens, the 1820s, 1830s. To within 100 years, everyone just thinks the world's this way. Because of the Industrial Revolution, women lost significant economic value. Before, they were equally as important as men. They might have different roles. And yeah, politically and legally, men had more rights. But economically, for the vast majority, only the very wealthy, where women had this kind of role outside of just being important for the survival of the family. But now things changed. It's a paycheck, almost always brought home by a man. That's what decides. It's no longer what the woman does, it's what the man does. And actually, it was a big issue. Do women resist this change? Did they resist? What is the role of women in this society where they no longer have as much economic value? I know that's a horrible way to put it, but families are not producers of goods anymore. They're not making things in their house. It's shifted. What role do women have? Caretakers. And you're about right, it's almost like a caretaker. But that's when they took this role that the very upper class elite, this kind of stylized role of women for the extremely wealthy and the nobility. And they put it from, okay, how do we convince people this is the right way? And they presented it as women are above. They're above all the dirtiness and messiness of life around, getting a job and production, all that science and things like voting and things like that. Women are above. They're on a higher plane. They're more noble. And so they presented this almost like a religious or a cult. The cult of what? Domesticity. And it applied these middle class values, which were actually the upper class values, before women had to work. Now it will be, no, the role of women is, and it's always been this way. And what's the number one role of women? What's the number one thing all young women must do? What's that? Even before that.
Get married.
Oh, they'll have to learn. Yeah, get married. The first thing, gotta get married. Gotta get married. Then what? Have children. And here's the thing about having children. So we got get married, have children. Careful. Women, if they're on a higher plane, they'll be responsible for the moral, the ethical upbringing of the children. They will do that. Because women are involved in the messiness of all this production and business and money. They're not about that. They don't care. Now, you notice it's implied as above. It's also implied as women couldn't understand these things. So there's it's a kind of a double-edged sword there.
That's what I was gonna ask. Was it meant to just make women better or just screw women up?
No, not to make them better. It's basically implying that's the only role women can do. Well, interesting way you say cool, but we'll leave it at that. And so have children, but care about their moral and ethical upbringings. Next, what else have they got to do? You got to cook and clean that house. Before the Industrial Revolution, no one cared if you had a clean house. For most people, it was survival. I mean, there are other things more important. But now, women better clean that house. Because that's the way the wealthy live. Now, the wealthy had servants. So women will become that servant, aka caretaker. That's why I like when you said that. This picture shows it pretty good. Now, this is from the 1870s. Home sweet home. Who's clearly in charge of this household? No. I mean, isn't he coming like, I'm in charge? And look at everyone's like, oh, you're so wonderful. The cat, right? And wallpaper, by the way, was like this new wonder decoration of the Industrial Revolution.
I see there's like a baby on the floor. Is that another baby?
Yeah, that's a small child, like a.
Oh, I thought that was like a really small woman.
No. Well,
Talking about art, right?
a girl, yes, and there's a bird. But you notice a nice clean house. And this really shows the cult of domesticity, I thought, pretty well. And it was not like this. It was much more complex for men and women, especially the vast majority who everybody had to work and everyone had needed for survival. Now it's implied they have this ulterior life and he just kind of comes in like from a different world. In fact, a lot of women will talk about that, where their husband will go off into a world that seems more exciting, at least it's different. And they just kind of appear. And this is also going to be called Republican womanhood. And Republican womanhood is this concept that, and this kind of comes from John Adams. He's thinking, what's the role of women? To teach their children to be good citizens. That's Republican womanhood. To teach their children to be good citizens. The founding fathers had this idea. And it was one of those things where, sure, women don't have all the rights, but they have the more important job to teach their children to be good citizens. Now, once again, that's pretty condescending towards women. And it also applies that they'll teach the young boys how to be good citizens and the young women to do what? To teach young boys how to be good citizens. And this reinforces itself. And it goes in this loop where they say, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's supposed to be. And so mothers teach their daughters to do what?
To be a wife.
Yeah, to be a wife, get married, clean house, have children. And then they teach their daughters to do what? And so on and so on. It perpetuates itself. And much like other things we've seen, especially like it is a lot like racism. After it goes on for a while, people forget that it used to not be this way. And one thing you have to get down, people start thinking this was the traditional role of men and women, when it was much more complex than this. So by the end of the century, that has become the way women are supposed to be. And so when there's going to be a fight for equal rights for women, one of the arguments against it will be you're going against what's traditional. Women are supposed to be this way. Why do you want to destroy our traditional values? Which is a pretty hard argument to go against, because most people don't know. So this is a pretty new deal. And what of the children's? Oh, almost forgot. Women, what legal and political rights that women had going into the 19th century would be lost. Women had more legal rights in 1800 than they did in 1830, especially married women. Married women lost all their rights with the Industrial Revolution, where they became virtually slaves. And this would go on into the 1970s. Right? In some states, until really recently. In fact, there's still a few states where married women have fewer rights. Some are outright terrifying what few rights women have. But they just not enforced anymore. Some are just unreal. But political rights too. A number of states allowed women, if they had property, to vote like men. And by 1830, those rights were taken. Does everyone hear what I said? They lost legal, but also political rights. And so some women could vote. And one of the myths of American history, and we see this a lot, it's presented this way that there's always progress. Sure, there might be good and bad things, but it's always this continuous move upward. We're always getting better, getting better. It doesn't work that way. And depending on your point of view, but there might be things you see are really good things, a big step forward, and then there'll be steps back, a step forward, and a step back. And so women lost rights. And women are uniquely vulnerable to this because women are not equal citizens under the Constitution of the United States today. And so it could happen again. In fact, be ready for it. So, one more thing. What of the children's? Everything about children changed too. The whole family is going to change. Before the Industrial Revolution, what was the number one reason to have children? Yeah, you need hands. And since you get more money for how much they produce, more hands, more money. After the Industrial Revolution, more children means what? You have one paycheck coming home for the most part, and that means less money. And so what's going to happen to family sizes with the Industrial Revolution? That happens to every country that begins the Industrial Revolution. Family sizes drop. Once children are no longer an economic unit but become something else, which we'll get to in a second, family planning will become crucial. You decide when you'll have children. Because I don't know if you know this, but they're expensive. Did you know children eat?
I know.
And they require clothing,
Care.
heat, a name. I mean, all these things are difficult. And obviously more than that. And so families now look at it as like, okay, we want children. Why? It's a good question, right?
It's to carry on their name.
Yeah, partially, but most people don't have much to carry on. There's an element of that. Because they want to have children. It's a big difference, isn't it? From we need workers to we want to be parents. We want to have children. We want to do this. So now they become something you want. Isn't that a bigger incentive to like do things like care for them?
Mhm.
Doesn't it fit in with the cult of domesticity? If you're going to have children that are now a choice, we want to have it. Don't we care about their moral and ethical upbringing? That's what the mother's for. But that fits together. We want to have children and we want to be nice for them. It's no coincidence that you're going to see the expansion of public education. We want them to have a better life. And they want to be nice to them and give them things. Can we see a holiday coming back? The secular holiday, and it's very secular. A holiday of Christmas will come with the Industrial Revolution. 1860s is where we get our vision of Santa Claus. That's a Thomas Nast cartoon from New York. This is the first one. This one is just outright scary. But the secular holiday of having this holiday, huh?
1860.
Yeah, well, 1860s for Santa Claus. But the holidays, we see 1840s, you start seeing, it starts changing in Britain before. It was the night before Christmas. And all through the house. Where do you think that came from? 1820 in Britain. Christmas Carol? Dickens just kind of made up the story about giving gifts. They'd done it before, but he kind of made it up. 1824. Yeah.
So before we get off like the children and like family aspect, so obviously like now in today's age, like 18 is kind of like the norm, like when someone goes off to college or whatever. How did that kind of work? Was there a norm at that time? What would really happen?
Not necessarily weird. I have a good question I should have brought, because I almost forgot to say this, so thank you for mentioning that. You know, adulthood is always varying, and sometimes it'd be 21 for a lot of things, but it just varied. But here's the thing. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people got married much later, like late 20s, early 30s. When the Industrial Revolution began, the marriage age started going lower and lower. You started seeing a lot more people getting married like at 18. Heck, by the 1950s, it was very common for young women to get married at 16 or 17. Which I know, that's your age, right? So there should be more time, and young men to get married, 18. That was normal. And then it started getting older again. But the Industrial Revolution actually get married younger. So I guess you see that's part of the reason why I went from 21 to 18 to being an adult. Now people get married older. And you see that in all countries when the Industrial Revolution, they get younger, they start getting older. I know we're saying, wait a second, these places then would get married when they're 10 and 12. Those were arranged marriages for like family names and things like that. They had ulterior motives. And so back to Santa. There are two big things with the Industrial Revolution that come together to make the secular holiday of Christmas. What is secular? Non-religious. Because it started out very non-religious. Christmas is not an important holiday for Christmas. For Christians, what's the important holiday for Christians? Easter! No one cared about Christmas. They could have a function, have a little ceremony, but it was the 7-day drunk. In fact, that's why the first full-time police force was created in New York City to stop Christmas. And then it comes back. But think about this holiday for families to come together, because the families now changed, aren't they? And now to do something nice for children and gifts or whatever that might be, the idealized Christmas. Eventually you got this creature they made up. I'm not really sure what Santa is. For Christmas. And you combine that with the Industrial Revolution, which caused both of them. But the Industrial Revolution caused the change in family. And now we have capitalists. They're making goods and they want to sell them. What a great way to sell goods than to create a holiday where people buy a lot of stuff. You get a holiday and push it where people demand things and then you sell them in money. Don't they come together quite well? And then it's when the ironic twist, then it would kind of come back to, people would say, well, we have to get back to a more religious Christmas like the way it was. And that is so ironic because that's not at all the way it was. But just much like they call it domesticity. It seemed like that must be the traditional way. So let's go back. So yes, there'll be talk about a war on Christmas and not going back to traditional values of Christmas. I think it'd be wrong to have a 7-day drunken capitalist. Somebody would complain. I'm looking at you, probably you people. I just wonder, that'd be kind of funny if Mr. Zanto walked in. Okay, so what we're gonna do for Christmas this year? Okay, so when you go to China and see Santa Claus, you can understand how powerful that secular holiday has become. And so, out of the same thing, we have the women's rights movement. And women's rights, middle-class women started this women's rights movement out of the Industrial Revolution, that women lost rights and then fought for it. Middle-class women, some of the big trappings of middle-class families, that was, looking at my hand because I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh, having a servant. Having a servant. A little bit more time. If women are responsible for the morality now of the family, a lot of middle-class women thought, wait a second. Okay. I'm going to become a lot. You know, I almost forgot something with the changing role of women. Let me just add one thing. Sorry. If women are supposed to get married, have children, be their moral teachers, and clean house, what if they don't do those things? What are they?
Nothing.
They're what?
Nothing.
Yeah, and the way that we'll look at them as you're a failure. You're a failure and there's something wrong with you. And that's a big thing. Imagine your whole life and you know you only have one option for success. There's no other choices. Men, more choices. Women, one. And that one choice is to not do anything on your own. It's a big deal that's coming up. So, a lot of women chafed against that. And they thought, okay, if we're only supposed to worry about the morality of family, I want to supposed to stay in this role. What about the morality of society? So they started getting involved in what's going on around them, basically keeping that same motherly role. And you'll see them in reform movements like abolitionists, which wants to get rid of what? What's that? Yeah, slavery. And temperance, which is drinking. Also prison reform. There was a silent reform. So a few of these reforms, all stemming from the Industrial Revolution in some way. But we're talking about women getting involved in society and then come to a question of rights. We're going to fight for slaves to have rights, like liberty. And a lot of women who got involved in this movement looked at it and thought, I think very logically, why should we just fight for slaves to have rights when they're virtually slaves right here in their own homes? Women don't have rights. What about us? And that movement from, think about the society, I want to get involved in something that still stays my role as women, fight for rights, what about us? You see the same thing in the 1960s. For women being involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and what about us? And so, with that, you have the beginnings of the women's rights movement, and they would fight for equal legal, political, economic rights. All these make sense. Society too, but societal rights, cultural norms really change with economy and legal rights. And remember, they lost these and so the power went out. How did that happen? That's kind of weird. It's Paul McCartney. Oh, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? No. But which one of those three? They're all tied together. Legal, economic, or political rights, which is most important? You can't change the law. You can't change the economy unless you have the right to vote, which is political. Voting, and they took the name from Britain, suffragettes. Suffragettes, remember, suffrage is the right to vote. And we're introducing it here. We'll come back to it in the teens. We'll come back to it in the 60s. But kind of mix things in. I refer to it as we go on. But the women's rights movement with the Industrial Revolution. And three of the most important leaders of this first women's rights movement, Lucretia Mott probably deserves the most credit for really beginning to organize women out of the abolitionist movement. Middle class woman. But her friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, would probably be the most charismatic leader, both brilliant people, but Stanton had this ability to talk to people and begin to sway people to change their minds without offending them, which is a really hard thing to do. And then a very young woman named Susan B. Anthony met Stanton, and she would become a tireless fighter for equal rights for women. There's a few issues about race we'll get talk about later. And unlike Stanton or Mott, she would not marry. Her whole life was focused on equal rights. The 19th Amendment, which would be ratified in 1920, is the Susan B. Anthony. And pretty amazing person. Very intelligent. And all three of them would be at the world's first Women's Rights Convention. The world's first. Where was it? Upstate New York. Do you remember? Yeah, Seneca Falls. 1848, which is the Europe Revolution. All over Europe was revolution. The U.S. kind of had it is different because we're the U.S. But even though the suffrage movement began in Britain, the U.S. had the first one. And it said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. What document does that come from? Yes?
Declaration.
Yeah, the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, that's a radical statement. Just like saying in 1776, all men are created equal, all men are created equal, all men and women in 1848, that's radical. And it's going to take 72 years to finally get the right to vote. And they're going to fight, focused on suffrage. There would be a few legal things. I should add, okay, there's Mott, there's Stanton. A few men came, mostly from the abolitionist movement. A lot of great names in here, but we can't go through everybody, but Frederick Douglass. Man who ran away from slavery and bought his own freedom, would become a tireless fighter, not just against slavery, but for equal rights for all. Seneca Falls, pretty town. Yeah.
Why was it at Seneca Falls?
Because Seneca Falls was in upstate New York, and there's a whole religious revival there called the Burnt Over District. And part of the reason was the abolitionist movement was strong there. And so, speaking of that, temperance. The temperance movement also picked up here. And the temperance movement was against drinking. It was led by women, and there were religious reasons why. How can you be truly pious if you are not sober? But there's something else that went with this. And by the way, I'll come back to this. We talked about this with families. One paycheck. If it's drunk away, the family starves. That's a weird way to put it. Drunking. Too drunk away. It's not drinking. Drunk is, but it doesn't sound right. If you drink away your paycheck, that's better. But then lastly, how did the capitalists feel about this movement to stop drinking? I'll explain her in just a second. Did capitalists approve of the temperance movement, or did they disapprove? The vast majority not only approved, but secretly funded it. Yeah. What do you call the amount of work you produce in a day? What do you do? Will productivity go up if you have sober workers, if they're not hungover? They wanted to control the workers' lives outside the factory. But it's hard to say you can't drink. But what if they fund movements to encourage this? Coincidence, second grade awakening's coming too. Don't drink. Except for the bar owners and tavern and the brewers and those kind of things. They didn't. But the capitalists funded it. And one of the first political parties would be very much a temperance party. The first parties after this era of good feeling. The Whigs. It's also intensely shown. Here's the tavern owners holding the Bible and the drink abundantly, O beloved, your parts from the Bible. And they're being attacked by the suffragists. It was intensely I didn't put this down, let's get down, anti-Catholic. There's a lot of Catholic immigrants, and the thought was amongst a bunch of Protestants that they're a bunch of drunkards. Catholics aren't really, to their point of view, there's something wrong with their Christianity, they're just following dogma. The most famous of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, but the most famous fighter was Carrie Nation. See her with her axe? They would go into taverns where women did not go. Did not go into taverns. And they would go in with their axe. We just storm in the middle of business hours and just start chopping away at the bar. And they're infamous. They're coming in, and anyone get in the way, they chop them. And they're like, everyone's terrified of Carrie Nation. And so there she is, leading her way in there. Want to see a good picture from Montana as you go out? Here's the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And there they are, leading a float. Helena, 1916. Isn't that cool? All right. So tomorrow's Wednesday. That's sad.
I'm so excited.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Which should come first? Like.
People that Susan B. Anthony would be like, she would say this and be criticized, but her attitude would be, yes, black kids, like black women rights too. First we need white women. I don't know. And that's the kind of thing that holy men. I mean, but it seemed very logical to her because in her point of view,
Yeah, no, that's all.
you have to get one support.
Maybe.
It's all there. You read the truth, right? Yeah. Why? Oh, I did. We're going to be starting back.
And second thing, you have to pass these to get AP credits.
So it goes, I know for the classroom. Are you planning on getting that?
Absolutely not. I was just curious.
Yeah, no. The AP class is just but it's my access. Don't want.
Absolutely not.
That's the great thing about it. Unending war.
That's like,
No.
we weren't supposed to say.
I didn't have a thesis, so
I
do have a thesis.
Every essay should have a thesis. This is America.
Oh, mine's a weak
Mine's a weak thesis.
And my sources are like hard.
Just jot it down there on the PowerPoint. If you need a stapler, I have one. Stapler.
It's like typed out. I like have it printed, and I can prove that it's here. I'll share it with you.
Who buys that?
I don't have.
Who lives Norris?
I just left the printed version of my house. I'll bring it.
Yeah, share with me.
Yeah, she got that skill.
Everybody, staple. You know what? Let me look at this. You'll give it to me tomorrow. Why don't you have it printed? I'll keep your phone next week.
I was gonna do it once, like I said.
Math is.
Why do you need math?
Norma, I was why do you guys say by the way? You just kind of hold it to the end, you kind of roll the dice. You get to me tomorrow, won't be Staple! Yes. I do want to know where you guys are.
Can I put it on my slide?
Yeah, just put it on, write it down and you did that. Just hold on. Hooligans and police. You want to be a hooligan?
Actually, I want to be a
Let me see, let me see, let me see. Let's see, let me look at it.
Don't trust me.
You decide. Awesome, okay. All right, take out your papers. Does anybody need a staple? I'll throw it at you.
That's the one.
Yes. You can see it. Did you guys say your mom wants? Who wants a stapler?
I used to play.
I'm gonna staple your hand to Nora's shoulder. That'd be a tough one to explain. All right, so take out your papers. Make sure your name is on it. And before we get, I did find an article, you know, as you well know, Kit Kats are big in Japan. And so, yeah, there's like 70 flavors of Kit Kats in Japan. It's like, it's awesome. You know, I've always really wanted to go to Japan. It's an amazing civilization, it's an amazing culture, and now they're the most amazing place in the world. Wow. Because of Kit Kats. Green tea Kit Kats, and the strawberry. Plum Kit Kats? I wouldn't be surprised. Yes. If I go to Bozeman.
And they sell green tea Kit Kats.
I think I've had one. I think
I'll give you a strawberry shortcake.
Or you can probably order them online.
yes.
Wasn't there like a new chocolate discovered?
Yeah, we don't get that the rest of the world gets.
That's fair.
Oh, actually, yeah, I heard something like
It's like a
that.
red
One
chocolate.
point seven cards.
And you have a pink chocolate, which is like strawberry.
I don't know. There's Sarah. Yes. You're good people. But it's like strawberry. It's like dehydrated strawberries mixed in with cocoa beans, and then they that's the real deal. Hand up your papers.
You know that because it's made up.
Alex, got staple off.
No, it's our dogs are taking it. That was in response to him stapling my physics. So, is that you got?
You did it?
Don't read it.
I just wanted to say, Jason, I think we're going to 1.15. All right, next. This all the papers we have.
I got mine.
If I don't have your paper, some people show me that I'll print it, but if not, then it'll be late. And we are starting the presentations. And then we have just a little bit left of the Mythbusters, but they went through all the different, well, the 4 biggie of the conspiracy theories and proved them all that humankind did not land on the moon, right? We all know that's true. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'll be on the test. I'll ask them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you examples to explain. Like I'll put a list of like 3 or 4 of those of the conspiracy theories, and you must say how they've been proved false. Yes.
Well, they just proved that you could take all.
Yeah. Did you notice NASA was part of every one? Yeah. What they did is it's even a bigger. And by the way, they used to have when I first started. I showed this a few years ago. Then they didn't show it, and they showed it again. I think it's a great episode. But they had to take down their comments page because so many people were like, "You're part of the conspiracy and you're involved. Why don't you just admit it? You know, you're part of some elaborate conspiracy to hide the fact that we humans never went to the moon." And they got bitterly attacked.
Poor boys.
There's something wrong with the internet. People become real jerks on it.
Yeah, because they can hide behind you.
Yeah, yeah, they would never do that in someone's face, but. Yeah, look at you. All right, so your presentations go, you are gonna have to take notes on them. I will ask between 7 and 8 questions from every minute of their speech. No, I'm thinking about 2 questions from each one. And I try to make them pretty basic. Each presentation. And the questions will be, what was on the 3rd slide of Alex's presentation? What? Yeah, you have no idea. And like I would go, wait a minute. You're eating an orange Kit Kat? No, not no. Things don't come in that color.
I hate you.
All right, everybody. All right, here we go. Take out your notes. Who is going to go first? Peter. Oh, do you want to go first? That's it. You're going to go first, man? All right. And then when we get done, I will go through a couple of things, but I'm just going to jot down things for each presentation. And I'll get it set. Did you email it to me?
I did not. I just shared the SAP.
Oh, I didn't do that.
Oh, you didn't do that? Oh, we were filming that whole thing. Oh,